Did you know that, in a move that would forever alter the course of history, the Pope once drew an imaginary line down the vast Atlantic Ocean, essentially dividing the entire non-European world between just two countries, Spain and Portugal? This astonishing act wasn't just a matter of cartography, it was a bold assertion of papal authority over the fate of continents and peoples. Over 5 centuries ago, this decree set in motion a chain of events that would shape the destinies of millions. The world, as Europeans knew it, was rapidly expanding, and the thirst for exploration and conquest was at its peak. The Pope's decision was not just about drawing a line, it was about controlling the future of entire civilizations. The line, stretching from the North Pole to the South Pole, was intended to prevent conflict between these two powerful Catholic kingdoms, both eager to claim new lands and riches. By attempting to keep peace between Spain and Portugal, the Pope hoped to avoid a devastating war that could tear Christendom apart. In the late 1400s, the Pope was not only the spiritual leader of the Catholic world, but also acted as an international judge and mediator. Many believed he had the divine right to grant lands to Christian monarchs, and his word carried immense weight in both religious and political matters. His decrees could legitimize conquests and redraw borders with the stroke of a pen. This remarkable decree, which would later be formalized as the Treaty of Tordesillas, handed Spain control over most of the Americas. Spanish explorers and conquistadors soon set out to claim vast new territories, forever changing the landscape and cultures of the New World. Meanwhile, Portugal was granted dominion over Africa, Asia, and a significant portion of Brazil. This allowed the Portuguese to establish a far-reaching network of trade routes and colonies, stretching from the coasts of Africa to the spice-rich islands of the East Indies. Yet this arbitrary line paid no heed to the millions of people already living in these lands. Thriving indigenous civilizations with their own histories, cultures, and societies were simply ignored in the European rush for power and wealth. The decree also overlooked the complex web of existing trade networks that had connected peoples across continents for centuries. To the Europeans, the world beyond their borders was seen as a blank slate, ripe for exploration and exploitation, regardless of those who called it home. As we delve deeper into the story of the Treaty of Tordesillas, we'll discover how this single agreement didn't just redraw maps. It set the stage for the rise of the first global empires, and its legacy can still be traced in the borders and cultures of our world today. To truly understand the Treaty of Tordesillas, we must first step back and imagine Europe in the late 1400s, a continent alive with ambition, curiosity, and a relentless hunger for new trade routes and untold riches. The world as Europeans knew it was changing rapidly. Kingdoms were growing, cities were bustling, and the desire for wealth and power was driving nations to look beyond their borders. The old ways of trading were no longer enough for the growing appetites of European monarchs and merchants. Spices and silks from Asia were among the most coveted goods in Europe, but they came at a steep price. These luxuries were controlled by powerful Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa, who acted as middlemen, and by the mighty Ottoman Empire, which dominated the overland routes. As a result, spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were worth their weight in gold. This monopoly forced other European nations to dream of finding their own direct routes to the riches of the East, bypassing the established powers. Portugal, a small but ambitious kingdom on the edge of the continent, took the lead in this quest. Under the guidance of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese explorers began venturing further and further down the coast of Africa. They invested in developing new types of ships like the caravel and advanced navigation techniques, making it possible to sail into previously uncharted waters. Their efforts marked the dawn of the age of exploration. In 1488, the Portuguese explorer Bartolomé Dias achieved a historic breakthrough by rounding the southern tip of Africa, later named the Cape of Good Hope. This daring voyage proved that a sea route to Asia was not just a dream, but a real possibility, opening up new horizons for European exploration and trade. Meanwhile, Spain was preoccupied with its own monumental struggle, the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. In 1492, with the fall of Granada, Spain finally unified under the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. With their kingdom secure, they turned their gaze outward, eager to rival Portugal's growing influence and claim their own share of the world's wealth. Into this fierce rivalry stepped Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor with a bold and radical idea. He believed it was possible to reach Asia not by sailing east around Africa, but by heading west across the uncharted Atlantic Ocean. His vision was met with skepticism, but he was determined to prove the world was round and that a new route to the riches of the East could be found. Columbus's proposal would soon ignite a race between Spain and Portugal, a race that would not only change the fate of these two nations, but would alter the course of world history forever. The age of discovery had truly begun, and the world was about to be divided in ways no one could have imagined. The stage was set for a dramatic clash of empires, as Spain and Portugal prepared to carve up the unknown world between them, setting the scene for the Treaty of Tordesillas. Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west, but Portugal rejected him, doubting his calculations. Spain, fresh from victory in the Reconquista, took the gamble and funded his voyage. In 1492, Columbus landed in the Bahamas, convinced he'd reached Asia, and returned to Spain with gold and tales of new lands. His discoveries alarmed Portugal, which feared Spain was encroaching on lands promised to them by earlier papal decrees. Tensions soared as both nations prepared for conflict, each determined to claim the new territories. To avoid war, Spain appealed to the Pope, the only authority both sides respected. This move set in motion the events that would divide the world with a single line. The fate of continents now hung in the balance. The Pope at this moment was Alexander VI, a Spaniard eager to support his homeland. In 1493, he issued the papal bull Inter Caetera, drawing a line west of the Azores and granting Spain rights to lands beyond it. Portugal, furious at being sidelined, argued the line was too close to their territories and threatened their sea routes. The Pope's decree, meant to prevent conflict, instead pushed the two nations to the brink of war. King John II of Portugal rejected the bull and demanded direct negotiations with Spain. The stage was set for a high-stakes diplomatic showdown. The fate of the world's oceans would be decided at the negotiating table. Spanish and Portuguese diplomats met in Tordesillas in 1494, each determined to secure their empire's futures. Spain relied on the Pope's authority, while Portugal insisted the line be moved west to protect their sea routes. Weeks of tense negotiation followed, with Portugal leveraging their navigational expertise and suspicions of undiscovered lands further west. Ultimately, Spain agreed to shift the line to 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. On June 7, 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed, dividing the world between the two powers. Lands west of the line went to Spain, those east to Portugal. This small adjustment would have enormous consequences, especially for South America. The world's first global empires were now officially born. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494, was a landmark agreement between Spain and Portugal that aimed to resolve their growing rivalry over newly discovered lands. The treaty established an imaginary boundary, 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, essentially dividing the non-European world into two vast spheres of influence. Everything to the west of this line would belong to Spain, while everything to the east would be Portugal's domain. This division was intended to prevent conflict as both nations raced to explore and claim new territories across the globe. However, the line was never actually mapped with precision. The technology of the time made it nearly impossible to determine exact longitudes, and as a result, the boundary remained vague and open to interpretation. This ambiguity led to centuries of disputes and negotiations, as both Spain and Portugal tried to push the limits of their claims, often redrawing maps to suit their interests. According to the treaty, Spain gained exclusive rights to explore and colonize most of the Americas, while Portugal secured its hold over Africa, Asia, and crucially the eastern tip of South America. This seemingly simple division would have enormous consequences for the future of entire continents. The treaty functioned as a non-aggression pact, legally barring each country from exploring, trading, or conquering in the other's designated hemisphere. It was a bold attempt to bring order to the chaos of the Age of Discovery and to avoid direct military conflict between the two most powerful seafaring nations of the era. Yet, the rest of Europe was not consulted. Other emerging powers like England, France, and the Netherlands dismissed the agreement as the so-called Pope's donation, refusing to recognize Spain and Portugal's exclusive claims. This would set the stage for future conflicts and colonial rivalries. In 1500, Portuguese navigator Pedro Álvares Cabral, while sailing to India, landed on the coast of what is now Brazil, just east of the Tordesillas line. This unexpected discovery allowed Portugal to claim Brazil, forever shaping the region's language and culture. As a result, Brazil became the only Portuguese-speaking nation in South America, surrounded by Spanish-speaking neighbors, a linguistic legacy that endures to this day and highlights the treaty's lasting impact. Over the centuries, the simple line drawn by the Treaty of Tordesillas would shape not only borders, but also the destinies of millions of people, influencing trade, culture, and even the spread of religions across continents. The legacy of the treaty was just beginning, setting the stage for centuries of exploration, conflict, and cultural exchange that would transform the world. The Treaty of Tordesillas averted war and unleashed an age of exploration. Spain, secure in its claims, sent conquistadors to the Americas, toppling empires like the Aztecs and Incas. Portugal, free to focus eastward, established a maritime empire from Africa to India and the Spice Islands. But the treaty's vague line caused new disputes, especially in the Pacific over the Spice Islands. The 1529 Treaty of Zaragoza drew another line, dividing the globe and selling Spain's claim to the Moluccas to Portugal. These treaties marked an audacious attempt by two nations to partition the world. The age of discovery was now truly global. The Treaty of Tordesillas shaped the world's cultural and political map. Spanish became dominant in most of the Americas, while Brazil spoke Portuguese, a legacy of the treaty's line. Spain's empire grew rich from American silver, fueling wars and inflation, but also creating rigid social hierarchies. Portugal built a commercial empire, dominating the spice trade and later developing a brutal, slave-based economy in Brazil. The treaty's disregard for indigenous peoples set a tragic precedent for centuries of exploitation. Other European powers, like England and France, ignored the treaty and carved out their own empires, challenging Iberian dominance. The treaty managed the initial rivalry but couldn't stop the rise of new colonial competitors. Its impact echoed through centuries of global conflict and change. The world would never be the same. Over time, the Treaty of Tordesillas faded as new powers rose and ignored its boundaries. The Reformation weakened the Pope's authority and real borders were drawn by armies, not lines on maps. Yet, the treaty marked a turning point. The world was now seen as a single, divisible space. It provided a legal framework for colonialism and set a precedent for ignoring indigenous rights. The treaty's legacy lives on in languages, cultures, and the inequalities of our modern world. Understanding this history helps explain the roots of today's global system. The story of Tordesillas is a reminder that decisions made centuries ago still shape our world, and that history's horizon is always just ahead,